we actually go into any kind of spiritual growth, we have to understand the psychology and the trauma and the issue of trust. Because you see, many people tend to say that they're addicted, or they have addictive personality disorder, or they have traumatic response. Everyone is on that level at the moment. Everybody is traumatized. In this day and age, everyone is traumatized. So how can we talk about some kind of supernatural, or highly advanced spirituality if this foundation is not there, if the foundation of peace and contentment and understanding that the trauma actually is something that we see in a kind of a perverted way, and it can be the way to liberation. So if we don't realize this, and I think that that's what Carl Jung at some point was trying to do. The problem is not everyone is mentally sick and imbalanced and emotionally imbalanced. The point is to tell yourself, I am not sick, I'm not imbalanced, I am traumatized. And my response in the body is the trauma. But then the question comes, is this your trauma or is it your mother's trauma? Many times we associate with people's traumas. And you need to reach that level of realization where, for example, you remember your, childhood moments, or the moment that when you were actually in the womb of a mother, whose emotions you were, on whose side you were. Let's say the relationships between people weren't balanced. It happens. Planetary positions, immaturity, the society does not prepare us for family. We don't understand what family is supposed to be, what the relationship is supposed to be, what sacrifices have to be done for the soul connection to stay, right? There's no even idea of soul connection, but for the majority of people. So then what happens? People just randomly bang, literally, and come across each other. And they just happen to create children because it's an embedded mechanism. But then they start having, because during pregnancy, it's like during the awakening, because that creative energy, that, you may say Kundalini, but we don't need to use the terms, whatever, it's a creative energy. The creative energy is in the process of creation. Once it creates, it's like swirls there in the stomach, it active, but you think, okay, everything is happening in the stomach, but it's not true, because the pituitary gland is activated, the pineal gland is activated, the portal is activated so that the soul of a child can enter the female womb, right? So there are preparations. When there are preparations, the woman is going through strange phenomena. She's going through some heated up situations, or she feels heated up, and because it's not a refined, majority of women are not refined and stable. So what happens is that in that moment, they just don't know what is happening. They're not in control. Their traumas come up, and it impacts their relationship with their spouses, with a man. Men are not taught how to respect and approach a woman during this sensitive time. Maybe consciousness is not entering the fetus yet, but it is watching there. It is watching, it's preparing. Now, while watching, it starts taking sides, because this is not an enlightened consciousness. It doesn't understand everything is neutral. It only discriminates in a negative sense of discrimination. So it starts taking sides. It starts judging. So the corruption of the soul already happens while it's watching its parents. And then it starts siding with the parent. It sees the pain of one parent. It sees the cruelty of the other parent, or it sees a misconduct, some bad behavior with the other parent. And so because it doesn't have that enlightened perspective, it only sees everything like flat, it doesn't have actually the strong perspective of what this is all about. This situation then creates an impact, an imprint on this child. And the child starts kind of developing more the features within themselves, regardless of their gender. They start copying that, they start imprinting more those features on themselves. Plus, they're very empathic and sensitive, they start taking the pain to themselves. you know, everything is transmission. So let's say, even if, let's say a baby is born, okay, whatever has been happening there, it's one transmission. It's a transmission of parents' relationship imprinting onto the child. Many times I ask people, did you have traumatic abuse or any kind of, they're like, no. But I see that their response to life is traumatic. They hide away, they run away from relationships, they're afraid of things. And they say, no, nothing happened to me. I had a perfect life, good parents, everything was fine. So they don't know what was maybe a tragic period, maybe some kind of a bit of a tense period. And so during that time, they kind of observed something and it traumatized them. Then there is another stage. Let's say the child is born. Now the mother is going on through hormonal changes. There are, you know, maybe depression or some kind of, and she's looking for more love from the spouse. If she doesn't get more love from the spouse, now she feels bad. She's breastfeeding the child. The child will always feel that they are not truly loved because it's the mother's feeling. But the child does not understand that because the mother transmits, but it's not a direct transmission, it's through the medium, through milk. It's the information, it's a secretion from her body that gets transmitted into the child's body. And yet the child is consciousness, but after all, the consciousness is that which imprints in the body. So it will direct the way of that child. It will create a life path for the child. Now, if during that time, you may say it's unconscious time, but it's questionable whether it's conscious or unconscious. It seems to be that consciousness does not have enough power over the body yet because it's small. The body has not fully developed. The brain has not fully developed. So what happens is consciousness is consciousness, but it's not yet that active or operative in the body. And so if during that time between 1 and 3, let's say someone looks at the child, just, oh, hello, nice, sweet smiles, the child receives transmission of kindness, transmission of love in that way as well. But if someone looks at that child with lust, not even saying anything, with any kind of pedophile agenda, any kind of disrespect or thoughts, like, for instance, some of my followers brought an example that when that being was a child, for some reason at birth, that being wasn't very beautiful. Somehow for the first couple of years, the facial expressions were kind of crumbed up on the face, or people did not find this being beautiful. But that being grew up in a very, very beautiful, extraordinary, beautiful being. It's just that at that stage, when he was born, he was not beautiful. Or people, I mean, again, the sense of beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? So those people who looked at that person at that time found this person not appealing. So many of the people were not even saying, because they were afraid to say not to hurt the mother, but their transmission. So this person suffered a lot of insecurities about their appearance, even though they were extraordinarily beautiful. You see? So it is the transmission of the collective as well. It's a transmission of our family, of our kin, of our widest circle of people. And so when these things happen, when we start our journey, spiritual journey, we first have to understand that the foundation starts with diving deeper into this aspect and understanding. And it's not only diving on the level of superficial psychology or going through some kind of psychological talks, but it's really receiving a different kind of transmission. The transmission where your consciousness can actually see itself as if from the outside. It awakens to the perspective, I am not these feelings because these feelings do not belong to me. I just empathized with my parents or with whatever situations happened there, with the sides, with one of the side of these archetypes. So I imbalance myself. Now, the first step on the path is to balance. Balance means to face pain. Because at first, when you face pain, you say, no, it cannot be my mother's pain or my father's or the pain of my parents or the pain of whoever. It is my pain. It becomes your pain. It becomes your pain. But again, if you go even further, you as a soul chose these beings to see their situation in reflection. Maybe you yourself in some other existences or incarnations had a situation like that. Now you are incarnating to witness this situation. And it's another chance for you to change your path. You either dive deeper into your victimization and you kind of drown with the victimization with emotions, and you start more and more as a being, as an individual being, associating with these emotions and trying to sort of persuade yourself so it becomes your ego. Yes, these are my emotions. Yes, I'm like that. Or you take courage to see it from the outside, but there has to be some kind of a push, a spiritual awakening, you may say, so that you can actually witness this pain. And in the situations with people, when you clash with people, this pain is revealed. You cannot reveal this pain otherwise. So there has to be something or someone to reveal this pain. And usually what most of the people do, especially if they are in the immature stages of their life, they run away from this because they cannot face the trigger. They cannot see that the situation can be shifted anytime, provided they've chosen a different way. For example, if they used to hurt someone or say back or become harsh or cruel or indifferent or run away or escape and abandon people, they just choose, even against that egotistical attitude, they just choose to approach things with compassion, or to choose, instead of running away and abusing or turning into a victim and then an abuser, instead just completely just smiling and saying, I'm sorry, or and it feels at that moment that you can never do this because it's like you're going against that core, that stale, victimized core. And many times that core is not even yours. It is a collage or combination of all these traumatic experiences together. And so the easiest response is escapism. Escapism into drugs, escapism into alcohol or sexual whatever, perversion, or any kind of other forms of escapism. Work, like working too much, pushing hard to prove yourself, and yet numbing this pain, like dissociating, going into this mode, I don't care, and yet, or creating another trip. Oh, now I'm going to change my life. I'm going to do this and that. Yet nothing ever happens. Nothing ever happens like this because it's an illusion. Because the truth is that before you face anything within yourself, nothing can change fundamentally. People will change, relationships will change, maybe environment will change. Fundamentally, the core will remain. So you may change relationships and think, okay, now this time it's going to be someone truly right for me. And yet you find being triggered again and again in the same way, because it's not about other people. And sometimes you meet people who are truly your soul connection, or they really invoke true love in you. But if you are not able to accept it and receive it, you will try to run away, because they will also trigger that pain. Because before you accept true love and understanding and really understand your correct path, which is the path of the soul, you will experience pain until this pain is exhausted. And so sometimes we think, okay, so then I have to suffer for the rest of my life until I exhaust my pain, or I have to suffer into the next life. No, the point is that everything can change like this in a click of a finger. Everything can change in a click of a finger, provided the person is able to just change the typical pattern of behavior. If they were going into escapism, going into binge eating, going into self-harming, going into provoking people or provocations or any kind of victim, abuser, savior kind of axis, this time they realize it can't work. I'm only harming myself at the end. I'm depriving myself from happiness. I'm depriving myself from deeper kind of perception of the path, because I choose ego. And this ego is not some kind of a ephemeral thing. It's something very concrete. It translates into our action. And so because we're hurt, because we're victimized, or because we accepted the hurt of our parents, we become eventually abusers as well. So if we see that someone is kind to us, someone is open, we are afraid of that. We suspect, we do not trust. And so on this path, the most important is to regain trust in the path itself. And the path doesn't mean that there is a specific spiritual path. It's the path of self-balancing, self-restoration. And this self is not egotistical self. It's the inclusive self. It's the self that allows love and compassion at every point. And love and compassion equals contentment. Because if you act out of contentment, you can't hurt anyone, nor you can be hurt. Because you are what? Sincere. The path of love and compassion is sincerity. Most of the people say, I'm afraid, I'm not sincere, is because they're afraid to be themselves, because they are afraid that they will be judged, that they will be prosecuted, or because in their childhood they did not gain the sense of security within themselves because of the events and relationships of their parents, or the relationships with their siblings and the extended family, or someone violated their trust. Now, for the rest of their lives, they're suffering dramatic events because of themselves. And yes, they do attract people of different kinds, but because of their own behavior, because of their own choices of words and actions, they tend to pervert their path again and again towards trauma. Again and again, they cannot make the right choice. Where the decision, the right choice could be just in a click of a finger made, and everything would have shifted. And so they keep on suffering. But for some beings, especially who have discovered that within themselves, that they awaken to that sense of, I am in a unified way, I am that contentment and equanimity. So these beings do suffer too, but in that case, they are able to actually look at traumatic situations and whatever happened with their parents and siblings and extended family and all those traumas from a little bit elevated perspective. And this is where the journey begins. This is where they start this path of transformation. But if on this path of transformation they are alone, there is again a chance that at some point their mind will create a sense of it will try to again, in a hidden way, maybe get them entrapped again in something. So for that, we need some sort of a guidance. We need some sort of we need to receive guidance. We need an absolute trust in our inner path, the higher path. Because once we awaken to the higher path, we perceive, yeah, this is the higher path. So is this the path of ego? No. Is it the path of becoming special because I feel insecure and not special? So I'm looking for the ways to become special. Is it the path of self-gratification? No. Is it the path of becoming something and wrapping yourself into something so that you feel secure? No. It's the path of stripping your veils, or veils. These are like, stripping off yourself of all that camouflage that you've created because of insecurity until this day. So when you look at yourself, you are like, you can go back to the same paths where you just create extra layers to yourself. You all the time find some new activities or not something to do, so you camouflage the trauma. Or you just strip that off and you just face that and realize it's not me. So, and to face it, in theory, intellectually sounds extremely easy, but after all, it is pain of the physical body. And you will always experience it in your solar plexus when you face people, in your lower abdominal, in your heart, in your throat, because that's where you process information and store. And even though it's your consciousness and you can always disconnect and say, okay, when I go into meditation, I disconnect, I don't feel any pain. This is another escapism, even though it is a spiritual escapism, and you might have spiritual experiences, you may disconnect. After all, you are still in the body. And as long as you have this body, the seed of this body still remains in the body. And you have to feel it consciously in the body first, before it starts dissolving on the level of consciousness. That's why the journey and the actual spiritual path is so difficult, because you have to face all these sudden changes, sudden disappointments. But if you look at them, that they are disappointments, they are problems of my parents or me or whoever, you will never go to the core. You will never reach the core, because to reach the core means to face the pain without trying to wrap it up into anything or create anything out of it. It's because of this person and because of that. It's just there. Pain, fear, palpitation. All of these are reactions of the body. Even though the trigger is from the outside, the trigger creates a thought pattern that invokes emotion, and this emotion imprints on the physical body, on the nervous system, as a feeling or as some sort of a physical stress. And so if this stress is not addressed, and if we cannot look at the pain without stories, we will always blame the world and remain the victim of this world forever. The ego will always try to escape into the known modalities, delude and escape, or try to find some way where it can feel comfortable and be in a pleasing environment again and again. For the majority of the people, it's so difficult that they say, I no longer want to be spiritual. But the thing is, we're always spiritual. So whether we choose to face pain directly or through life circumstances, we will face it no matter what, just in different time periods. Because when you're awakened, it's more intense. And when you are just walking along your life path, it's a little bit more extended, but it will be clashes, and still you will be facing, but kind of more unconscious, more kind of blaming the world and allowing the world to affect you and take over your being. But actually, it's the ego that takes over the being and not the world, because the ego thinks that the world is against it. That's why it's called ego. Because if it's the being, your natural being, it's the world is its extension. So the important thing is to cultivate trust. Whatever happens in my life is always beneficial, whether it hurts me or doesn't. First thing. Second thing, whatever happened to my parents, I'm not in charge of that. I'm not in charge of that. I do no longer allow these emotions to enter my space of consciousness. I see these emotions of my mother as my own shadows. The problem is that at that point, we felt, or the person who is abused, right, the child in general, when we are children, we feel that we are so small, we are in the hands of other people. So what can we do but trust life? So at that moment, we're in this beautiful, absolutely unconditional state of trust. And so when we are at that time, we are unconditionally trusting life. But then someone comes and does something, someone takes us, someone does something to us. And we feel that our consciousness is not comfortable. So it creates this corruption or disturbance in the flow of our unconditional trust. And so when this happens, we become incapable of trusting life anymore unconditionally. So we contract, and we are afraid. And so then from that moment on, we're no longer this unconditional trusting beings. We're contracted, suppressed, fearful beings who think that something outside of us comes and violates our boundaries. And so in order to heal and restore, we need to understand that nobody actually can violate the boundary, because there is no boundary. Because it's the boundary of the body that gets violated, but consciously we're still in the same flow. It's just that we choose to believe, because at that point when we're small and someone takes us, we feel this grip, we feel this limitation, which strengthens our sense of being a limited being. And so at that point, it impressed on our consciousness that I am also a limited being. If it's a nice embrace, if it's a beautiful, then we start loving it. We consider it love. We don't know as children that this is love, because we don't know such a concept. We feel warmth. So if we want to know what love is, in fact, it's some sort of a warm, encompassing, allowing feeling where even though our boundaries were kind of squashed, we still feel warmth. And so our consciousness doesn't feel actually squashed or violated. But when it's a violent grip, when it's a negative push, when it's something, our boundaries get violated. And so at that point, we start feeling contraction in these places. We start reacting, but we feel we're too weak because we're small, because we see these giants towering over us as our parents or other relatives. So, or someone just acts bolder than us, and so we feel instantly fearful and contracted. You learn these things later. You learn the dynamics of your family, all these relationships in the family, the way people communicate. So yeah, if there is an impediment in the flow of communication, the family, definitely it affects the child as well. So the child then feels like, okay, whatever happens, they can't express. And so then it violates kind of boundary on the level of expression, where they feel like there is some sort of a unspoken or hidden boundary they can't go over. And so, but you see, when we grow up with this, it's difficult to see outside of the situation. That's why we can only heal ourselves when someone gives us the heightened perspective, or when we awaken ourselves and we can actually look at these things in a kind of a detached manner, where we realize that our parents, relatives, relationships perhaps affected our sense of security, and the way we understand boundaries. So when you are insecure, you open up to the negative flow because you actually contract, because it's fear. So you're afraid, for example, if parents are quarreling, you're afraid, what if someone leaves? What if someone hits each other? What if someone does something to each other? And this already comes into play when you're between 3 and 7, when you can somewhat understand the dynamics. So this is also where the trauma crystallizes. It becomes quite a difficult task to heal it then and to change, because the contraction happens in the solar plexus. It's a betrayal of your trust, or it's a breaching of your security, or it's kind of, you were relaxed, happy, and all of a sudden you hear someone quarreling or abusing someone. The first reaction is contraction, cortisol. So now this is the fight and flight mode, where you're kind of, you don't understand what's happening, yet you're contracting. Okay, if it happened once, it doesn't go into this sort of deep impression. If it happens on and on, as if it's a recurring phenomenon, then it becomes crystallized in the body. And so you get much more irritable and insecure in life circumstances and with the world, with the other people, because it can even push you into this fight and flight mode. So the only way to deal with it is to, first of all, realize what happened and to start, I don't know why this sounds happen, and to start sort of healing your nervous system from within. Like when the moment you contract, you inhale, exhale, and relax. So also, if you have experienced spiritual awakening, if there are, you awaken to your subtle being, you start seeing that through certain movements, spontaneous movements or Kriya meditation, you can actually, your own body will start healing and directing energy to the points where this energy is mostly required.